Welcome to another episode of Critic.Reading.Writing. My name is Quayson, and I am a professor of English at Stanford University. This week's episode, we will be doing an overview of previous episodes we have covered, including Postcolonialism, Shakespeare's Othello, Conrad's Heart of Darkness, Frantz Fanon's The Fact of Blackness, and Tayeb Salih's Season of Migration to the North. Apart from distinguishing the difference between the post in postcolonialism as a temporal marker and postcolonialism as a general theoretical orientation, we will also be using these various texts to explore the ways in which the postcolonial condition is illustrated in literature from different parts of the world. Understood not as limited to the implicit temporal marking of the post, but as the sign of a critical orientation toward colonialism and its legacies. Postcolonial studies in general have been concerned with the representation of experiences of various kinds, including those of slavery, migration, colonial oppression and resistance, as well as the intersections among race, gender, and sexual identities as the products and responses to the continuing neo-colonial discourses of Euro-America and other parts of the world. Postcolonial theory, on the other hand, pertains to a wide range of theoretical inspirations drawn from Marxism, the works of Michel Foucault, psychoanalysis, and colonial discourse analysis, among others, and applied to a wide range of contexts. Key early exponents of postcolonial theory and of colonial discourse analysis include Edward Said, Gayatri Spivak, and Homi Bhabha, three of the most influential figures in the field. Even though all three theorists worked from English departments, the field has since the 1990s been enlivened by contributions from different disciplines, including especially anthropology, history, and political science. What I am calling colonial discourse analysis itself pays attention to the ways in which language and discourse can be examined to highlight a colonial mentality, even when not focused on colonialism itself, but explored in different contexts that pertain to the relationship between power and representation. In external colonialism, colonial spacemaking often altered the pre-existing relations among well-constituted local groups, such as in India between the Mughals and the Hindus, or in Nigeria between the northern Muslims and the coastal Yoruba and Igbo. This was an aspect of what is now popularly described as divide and rule, even though the situation was much more complex than that, as Mahmoud Mamdani has instructed us in his book, Define and Rule. External colonialism also reconfigured the hierarchies between indigenous and diasporic populations, such as we have already seen with respect to Malaysia, Guyana, and other places. But the control of external territories often went hand in hand with internal colonialism, which took place not on the landscape of external territories, but within the metropolitan center itself. In contrast to external colonialism, then, internal colonialism has to be understood as depending on population management principles, often establishing distinctions between races of the same kind, such as can be amply illustrated historically in the relationship between the English and the Irish in Britain, or in the condition of the Basque separatists in Spain, or of Alsace and Corsica in France. Internal colonialism magnifies the distinctions among races and ethnicities of the same kind, as well as of different kinds, in service of what amounts to forms of colonial regulation and control. The various diasporas from the global south that reside in various metropolises of the global north serve to compound the picture for internal population management even further. Whether in its external or internal variants, colonial spacemaking ultimately involves the differential constitution of citizens and subjects. At any rate, the principle of internal colonialism allows us to apply postcolonial forms of analysis to, for example, China's treatment of the Muslim Uyghur population today, or to Russia's treatment of its Jewish population that was confined to the Pale of Settlement from 1791 to 1917. The point is that viewed from the perspective not of external territorial conquest and control, but rather of the regulation of heterogeneous populations, internal colonialism helps pinpoint different phases of colonial spacemaking practices in places that may not have conventionally been considered to fall under the purview of classic postcolonial studies. The Congo Free State was given to King Leopold II of Belgium after the Berlin Conference in 1884, and he ran it as his personal property from 1885 to 1908. The Berlin Conference was assembled to decide on the terms of the European colonization and regulation of trade in Africa, and is credited by historians to have formally inaugurated the scramble for Africa, with the Congo as its epicenter. The Congo Free State at the time of King Leopold's ownership was a whopping 905,000 square miles in size. This is roughly the size of France, Spain, Germany, Italy, the UK, Ireland, Portugal, and Belgium, and the Netherlands and Greece all together, or Texas, California, Montana, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and Colorado put together. Conrad's Heart of Darkness was first serialized as a three-part story in Blackwood's magazine in 1899. In it, the narrator, Charles Marlowe, recounts the story of his journey into the Congo to a group of sailors on a small ship on the River Thames in London. Marlowe's journey was undertaken into the heart of the Congo in search of Mr. Kurtz, a field agent who had become notorious throughout the region for having developed effective but unusually brutal methods for collecting ivory, one of the two precious commodities at the time that anchored the Belgian trade. The novella draws on material that Conrad wrote down in his diary on a 6-month trip to the Congo in 1890 when he worked as a ship's captain on a small boat on the river Congo. His eyewitness observations of the atrocious methods of Belgian exploration of the region and its natives were so upsetting that it led 9 years later to one of the most famous representations of the violence of colonial extraction in all of world literature. To understand how Conrad converts the scenes of near apocalyptic devastation to those of super subtle and elusive narration, however, we have to first come to grips with the real historical, geographical, and social context that informed his impressions. The Congo Free State was the source of incredible wealth that serviced first the luxury taste of Europeans and Americans through its ivory production, and then also the demands of the growing automobile industry and its dependence on rubber for the manufacture of tires. As David Van Reybrouck tells us in his book Congo, The Epic History of a People, in Antwerp there were warehouses packed full of tusks. In 1897, 245 metric tons of ivory were exported to Europe, almost half of the world's production in that year. Antwerp outstripped Liverpool and London as a global distribution center for ivory. Pianos and organs everywhere in the West were outfitted with keys of Congolese ivory. In smoky salons, the customers tapped billiard balls or arranged dominoes that were made from raw materials from its equatorial forest. The mantelpieces of middle-class homes sported statuettes made of elfin wood from Congo. On Sunday, the people went out strolling with walking sticks and umbrellas whose handles had once been elephant tusks. The methods that the Belgians used in the Congo had a devastating effect on all the communities along the Congo River, as well as in the hinterland. Girls as young as 11 and 12 were seized by European merchants to act as their concubines, sometimes even being incorporated into large harems for them. This is the source of the image of Curtis intended in Conrad's novella. More importantly, the extraction of ivory and rubber depended on various acts of wanton brutality upon the natives. Africans were routinely seized and held hostage until their chiefs or families delivered set cargoes of ivory and rubber. If the cargo was not satisfactorily delivered, the hands of captives were chopped off as punishment. Sometimes girls' hands were also chopped off for refusing to sleep with Belgian men, or simply as a show of unbridled lust and power. Every bullet shot by members of the Force Publique, the Belgian army in the Congo, had to be accounted for by bringing back either dead bodies or cut off limbs. In combination with disease epidemics and the social disruptions brought on by these violent extraction atrocities, the local population was decimated, with an estimated 500,000 Congolese dying in 1901 alone. Frantz Fanon provides us with an important dimension of what might be described as the psycho-existential complex under colonialism in Black Skin, White Masks, which was first published in English in 1952. In Black Skin, White Masks, there are two interrelated and indeed warring processes. That of the colonizer's attempt to distort all signs of personhood for the colonized Black person, and the colonized's response to these attempts. My comments will be mainly focused on the chapter titled The Fact of Blackness, where the dual processes are best encapsulated. At one point in his reflections in this essay, Fanon proffers a peculiarly fertile, self-reflexive insight that discloses something of his overall interpretative procedures. Quote, "In one sense, if I were asked for a definition of myself, I would say that I am one who waits. I investigate my surroundings. I interpret everything in terms of what I discover. I become sensitive." Close quotation. This statement is paradigmatic of some of the rhetorical maneuvers that underpin Black Skin, White Masks in general, and the essay The Fact of Blackness in particular. In this one statement, Fanon imputes the role of an interlocutor for eliciting a definition of the self, if I were asked. The eternal vigilance that he brings to bear on that enterprise. I am one who waits. I become sensitive. And above all, the degree to which all that he discovers depends ultimately on a fervent interpretation of his surroundings, both historical and cultural. What is conveyed in essays such as The Fact of Blackness is Fanon's sense of being surrounded by a proliferation of skeptical interlocutors, all of whom pose searing questions to his racial identity. Fanon typically stages his argument along three overlapping discursive axes. First is in the description of an anecdote or a cluster of anecdotes related to a personal experience. Second is in the report of something overheard or told to him in a social encounter. And third, and most elusive, is his responses to something written on the condition of the Black man. This third category of responses he considers to be social acts on a par with things overheard or said to him directly. In other words, what he reads about the condition of the Black man, he considers to be social acts on a par with what we would describe as microaggression. So he's reading it and he feels he's being attacked by variant forms of microaggression. Fanon's responses in all three instances are expressed via a panoply of devices that Sechi Otu described for us. But their dramatic nature also resides in the unfailing reiteration of two additional conceptual maneuvers. Fanon portrays every encounter as the simultaneous coalescence of experience and exegesis. That is to say, every experience is at one and the same time interpretative. He interprets and shows himself interpreting even as he experiences. So interpretation and experience are never separated. There's no time lag. The eloquent story he tells of how he won Desdemona's love is significant for appealing to everyone's natural disposition to sympathize with a tale of woe and tribulation. It scrupulously disconfirms any idea of blackness as attached to his adventures at all. And this is what we see. Othello, most potent, grave, and reverend signors, my very noble and approved good masters, that I have taken away this old man's daughter, it is most true. I have married her. The very head and front of my offending hath this extent, no more. Rude am I in speech, and little blessed with the soft phrase of peace. For since these arms of mine had 7 years' pith, till now some 9 moons wasted, they have used their dearest action in the tented field, and little of this great world can I speak, more than pertains to feats of broil and battle. And therefore, little shall I grace my cause in speaking for myself. Yet, by your gracious patience, I will a round and varnished tale deliver of my whole course of love, what drugs, what charms, what conjuration, and what mighty magic. For such proceeding I'm charged withal. I won his daughter. Still Othello. Her father loved me, oft invited me, still questioned me the story of my life. From year to year, the battles, sieges, fortunes that I have passed, I ran it through, even from my boyish days to the very moment that he bade me tell it, wherein I spoke of disastrous chances, of moving accidents by flood and field, of hairbreadth escapes in the imminent deadly breach, of being taken by the insolent foe and sold to slavery, of my redemption thence, and portents in my traveler's history, wherein of Antras vast and deserts idle, rough quarries, rocks and hills whose heads touch heaven, it was my hand to speak. Such was my process, and of the cannibals that each other eat, the anthropophagi, and men whose heads do grow beneath their shoulders. This to hear would Desdemona seriously incline, but still the house affairs would draw her thence, whichever as she could with haste dispatch, she'd come again, and with a greedy ear devour my discourse, which I, observing, took once a pliant hour, and found good means to draw from her a prayer of earnest heart, that I would all my pilgrimage dilate, whereof by parcels she had something heard, but not intentively. I did consent, and often did beguile her of her tears, when I did speak of some distressful stroke that my youth suffered. My story being done, she gave me for her pains a world of sighs. She swore in faith. It was strange. It was passing strange. It was pitiful. It was wondrous pitiful. She wished she had not heard it, yet she wished that heaven had made her such a man. She thanked me and bade me, if I had a friend that loved her, I should but teach him how to tell my story, and that would woo her. Upon this hint, I spake. She loved me for the dangers I had passed, and I loved her that she did pity them. This only is the witchcraft I used. Now, beyond the evidence of his extraordinary storytelling powers is the fact that Othello is here also divulging important information about his life course up to the point of this telling. Yet none of the events he described are exclusively within the realm of experience necessarily or exclusively of a black man in the period. The information about the landscapes he has traversed since childhood not only indicates a life of precarity and of travailous history, which is troublesome history, but also his passage through different topographies. Slavery, the antris vast, which is large caves, deserts idle, cannibals, and anthropophagy are added to accidents by flood and field and fierce deeds of battle to define various counter-social spaces. The spaces that Othello has been obliged to traverse are spaces actively designed to destroy society and social relations, but they do not necessarily prove that he's black. Since slavery during the Renaissance period was not limited to black people, but also encompassed white Europeans, Othello's story has a double edge to it. On the one hand, it signals a default understanding of the fate of blackness because of the word slavery. But on the other, it shows how that fate might have happened to anyone, irrespective of their race. In fact, historians have shown that in 1854, a raid of the southern Italian town of Vieste captured 6,000 white people who were then taken as slaves to North Africa. An Algerian raid of the Bay of Naples took another 7,000 in the same year, driving the price of slaves so low that it was said that a Christian could be swapped for an onion. Entire Adriatic coastal regions were depopulated on fear of Turkish slave raids, making Othello's story equally applicable to Black Africans as well as white Europeans in the period. At the heart of Mustafa Said's motivation in life is the drive toward self-authorship, that is to say, the ability to fashion his own identity autonomously and in complete control both of its contingent processes and of their final product. The problem of self-authorship is entangled with the process by which he becomes a highly successful intellectual in cosmopolitan London, as well as the precarities of intimacy between him as an Arab African and the many English women whom he lures into his bed. That Said later marries, then kills his English wife Jean Morris in an extraordinarily sensual ritual murder on their marriage bed, immediately invites comparison with Shakespeare's Othello. As we shall see in a moment, Salih's novel replicates the essential tragic morphology of Othello through the handkerchief that is used to focus the all-consuming, passionate love-hate relationship between Said and his wife. And even though at his trial, Mustafa Said is at pains to disavow Othello, I am no Othello, Othello was a lie, everything he does up to the court scene has been in the direct invocation of his literary predecessor. Ironically, the tragic reversal and the concomitant anagnorisis or recognition that attends it are firmly brought together for Mustafa Said with his wife Jean Morris, who encapsulates the high point of the co-constitution of Oriental archetypes between the English woman and Mustafa Said. She flips the power dynamic between herself and Mustafa in ways that he could not quite have anticipated. Her game requires the employment of archetypes that serve to convert the usual patterns of sexual pursuit, normally under his complete control, and into an instrument of his own hounding by her, and vice versa. For Jean Morris, Mustafa Said is both hunter and quarry, an oscillation that distorts his carefully managed process of self-authorship. Their relationship is defined very early as one of predation that is starkly different from what had existed between him and the other English woman. From first encounter, Jean Morris seems to stalk him as though she made a point of being where I was in order to humiliate me. She teases him while also repaying any acts of violence from him with even greater violence of her own. When I slapped her cheek, she kicked me and bit into my arm with teeth like those of a lioness. Rather, Jean designs to interpolate Mustafa completely anew, even against his will. She activates the Othello archetype through the most universally recognizable device of Shakespeare's play, the handkerchief. Once I find a man's handkerchief, which wasn't mine. It's yours, she said when I asked her. This handkerchief isn't mine, I told her. Assuming it's not your handkerchief, she said, what are you going to do about it? On another occasion, I found a cigarette case, then a pen. You are being unfaithful to me, I said to her. Suppose I'm being unfaithful to you, she said. I swear I'll kill you, I shouted at her. You only say that, she said with a jeering smile. What's stopping you from killing me? What are you waiting for? Perhaps you are waiting till you find a man lying on top of me. And even then, I don't think you'd do anything. You'd sit on the edge of the bed and cry. This is a deeply Shakespearean provocation indeed. Jean Morris's design is to invoke Mustafa Said as Othello, not merely as a process of Orientalist interpretation, but in order to elicit from him a different form of aesthetic self-expression. It is almost as if she's saying to him, I know you have laid on a false performance of your identity all your life, and that you have fooled many women with it. But now I challenge you to be the real thing. Be as passionate and as great as Othello, you ridiculous and pathetic fake. In Shakespeare's play, Othello had what amounted to an all-consuming passion for his wife and a sense of absolute duty regarding his commitments to Venice. But for Mustafa Said to become Othello and Jean Morris his Desdemona is also to articulate their relationship through a specifically tragic structural morphology that must issue in both their deaths. It requires not only that Said kill his wife as the surrogate of Desdemona with the skin of monumental alabaster, as Othello describes here in Shakespeare's play, but that he killed himself in place of the turbaned Turk, that is Othello. This also implies that Jean Morris has an inherent death wish through which she might invest her life and her death with a special meaning via the idiom of tragedy. However, as she intuits correctly, Mustafa Said is incapable of playing the tragic role she assigns him. He just does not have the guts to go the full length of it. And we might ask, why should he? Thank you very much. Please remember to give a thumbs up if you like this episode. Subscribe and share. Hit the notifications bell so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. And enter your comments in the section below. See you next week.